Let me actually watch this video because it's something the title is pretty catchy, but I wanted to know what was it about. It's something I plan to watch it already. So let's see.
London, the city of
It's called How
dreams
the
and one of the
UK is
wealthiest
becoming a
urban
third world
areas in the
economy.
world. Its economy is worth roughly £508 billion, which equals $652 billion. If it were an independent state, London would rank as the 22nd largest economy in the world, precisely above Argentina and Sweden. However, London's prosperity and that of southeast England is atypical for the country. This small area makes up nearly half the UK's GDP while having about a third of its population. If one were to amputate London's output, it would reduce British living standards by 14%, just enough to slip ahead of the US state of Mississippi. Yeah, the UK has seen better days. The last 10 years have been particularly tough. Real disposable income, which is income after taxes and benefits, has remained almost unchanged.
Many people will actually blame this thing on the Brexit, I'm pretty sure. They will say that it's the Brexit fault, they went out of the EU, that's why they have a big drop and so on. I don't think so. I think that the UK is facing exactly what other countries in Europe and in the Western world are facing. There is a drop in fertility rates, which are basically people are not making kids. There is no rewash of people who old lose their jobs and new ones who are substitute them. They're moving into a more geriatric economy, right? And this has a cascade effect onto everything else. And even though they use migration to fill that gap, the migration that they allowed people to come in, so the people that they allow to come in are not refilling those positions because those are cheap labor that you don't need anymore because it can either automate it or whatever. So the UK is just suffering from what Italy has suffered for 30 years already. The France, Germany will suffer now from the same fate. So it's a, let's say, Western recession. Let's call it like this, like an economic winter that is followed by the fact that there is a demographic winter.
The cost of goods and services has gone up. Compared to a decade ago, people can buy less with their income. Meanwhile, productivity is low, one of the lowest of any major economy, and housing has become nearly unaffordable, with the UK holding the record for the highest number of homeless people in the developed world. The cause for these issues is rooted in past political decisions. Britain has slumbered and stumbled its way through a number of setbacks. Now, the crisis has become endemic with no quick fix in sight. When you think about it, it's ironic. The UK was the first country to industrialize. Now, it stands to become the first to deindustrialize.
Well,
seen from a larger angle, Britain's economy is on a downward trajectory. Prices are rising too fast. Just recently, housing prices rose by more than £2,200 in a month. Unfortunately, this wasn't widely reported in the media. Looking at things from all angles is what we do, and Ground News provides us with invaluable.
Alright, let's see the video itself.
Not long ago, Britain was considered one of the world's most prosperous nations and a prime destination for skilled professionals.
Actually, this is true. When I was 15, 16, 17 and so on, I remember people actually wanted to go to London, first of all for the language, right? You didn't go to Germany because they speak German. Everybody more or less was about to start to learn English properly. So everybody wanted to go to London, and some of the people that I know actually went there because it was like a very attractive destination.
Seeking to advance their
careers. Make a career.
Today, not so much. The state is under incredible socio-economic strain, more so than people realize. 3 back-to-back geopolitical shockwaves have left it with a colossal debt: Brexit, COVID, and the Ukraine war. The catalyst, however, dates to 2008, when the financial crisis introduced long-lasting effects. Like everyone else, Britain was deeply injured, but the way it handled the fallout set it apart from the rest of the developed world. After borrowing roughly £141 billion to bail out British banks, the government opted for austerity measures instead of investing in fiscal and social policies. There were no significant tax cuts or minimum wage increases, there was no inflation control, no housing assistance, no job creation programs. You get the point. For ordinary citizens, the consequences were devastating. Real household income dropped and then flatlined for the next 15 years. In economic terms, this is known as a lost decade. For added
I was reading like the other day, Japan more or less had the same. When the bubble in Japan burst back in 1996, I think, or 1995, after that, even though the Japanese mentality behind work is like very strict, right? They love to work, they love to produce, and so on. They basically, from 1996 till now, there was not an economic growth that was remarkable for Japan. You don't live in a shithole, right, in Japan, but it also didn't grow a lot. And I noticed that when you go there with the euro or with the US dollar, you actually can basically buy out everything with 10 euros or $10 because the yen basically isn't worth that much. And this is all due to the fact that the economy has been stagnating for 30 years or more. Europe is simply, or the UK in this case, is simply experiencing the same lost decade that
perspective,
will
in
become
2007, the
20, 30
average
years.
British household was 8% less prosperous than those in Norway and just 6% behind those in the United States. In the years following, the deficit grew substantially. Today, British households sit 20% behind Norway and 16% behind the US in terms of real income. This drop in living standards is felt vividly among the middle class. Real household income is a fundamental driver of economic activity. It encourages consumer spending and improves living standards, all of which contribute to economic growth. In Britain, however, the government prioritized corporate interests above all else. But even here, in the corporate world, the gains were mostly short-term. The productivity rate was left on the back burner, and no significant investments were made in this domain. For context, increasing productivity is one of the most efficient ways to grow an economy. But, contrary to popular belief, improving productivity does not mean working harder. Instead, the point is to boost
Yeah,
economic output without increasing the amount of work. So, when an
yeah.
agriculture-driven economy switches to manufacturing microchips, productivity increases because the tech industry is more profitable and has greater margins. Ergo, the workforce is getting more out of it for the same amount of labor.
Are you paying too much rent? On connie.de,
To
you
be
can
honest,
easily
this is happening everywhere.
Is turning
It's happening everywhere, and I think actually this is wrong because the tertiary sector might be producing microchips or services like financial services, but that doesn't give you anything tangible. I mean, in the case of microchips, maybe yes, but it doesn't give you anything tangible. For example, doing finance and services only, and you are always at risk that you have to import the the food or anything if you have a very underdeveloped agricultural sector like many western nations do, right, then you're forced always to import. For the industry is the same, right? Heavy industries like metal working industry like I don't know, ThyssenKrupp, for example, in Germany, you always have to rely on a third party who sends you those metals there, and then you can refine it. Same with the oil and so on. So you're always based on someone else's primal material, and that's, in my opinion, that is a strategic problem, right? Because as you can see with Russia, as soon as they cut, like, okay, you are our enemy, no more gas, no more oil, the economy starts to suffer from that, not because you don't have that sector, but because that sector is bound to the primer material that comes from those countries. And I saw Germany, for example, doing this, getting close to those countries, like with Russia and the gas from Russia. They were extremely close to it. And then once the war against Ukraine happened, then they cut ties immediately. Not, I don't know, not understanding, or maybe they were forced from the US, most likely that. But then they realized that that gas, you cannot substitute it. Same with oil. They wanted to make a price cap onto the oil coming from Russia. Russia doesn't care because it has the oil. So if you say, for example, okay, then we will pay only $95 per barrel, and the other ones we will pay 76, so we will buy from other people. It's only you who does that. India, Iran, whoever, African countries will not care about your price cap on the oil. So they will buy at the cheapest price, and Russia will be happy to do so. So this misunderstanding that Europe, the world was Europe-centric or UK-centric or even US-centric, but the US is like something much more different than Europe. But that belief is just wrong. And you should actually take into consideration that the world doesn't revolve around us anymore.
Farmland into factories.
And it will have an
It
effect.
adds
Anything
to
that happens in
productivity
those
and
other
ultimately
countries.
improves the economy. In the UK, productivity output per capita debilitated after the 2008 crisis due to a lack of investment. This chart by the London School of Economics puts things into perspective. Before the crisis, productivity was growing at nearly 2% annually. After the crisis, however, it weakened substantially, changing a trend that had been in motion since the 1980s. The British workforce now has the second lowest productivity rate among the G7 economies, whereas before the 2008 crisis, it was second only to the US. The simultaneous effects of sluggish real household income and low productivity explain a lot about the performance of the British economy. It is essentially fighting for its life.
All right.
Britain's lost decade happened so casually, so indifferently, that none of its political parties acknowledged it, let alone addressed it. There was no political discourse on this subject that was affecting millions of households. But it was a crisis nonetheless, and so the discourse expressed itself in the form of Brexit. However, the uncertainty over Brexit made a bad situation even worse. It had a particularly sharp effect on direct foreign investment. According to the Bank of England, Brexit reduced investment by 25%, measured from 2016 to 2021. What's more, soon after Brexit, the onset of COVID exacerbated the economic crisis.
As I said, many people will probably say it's Brexit's fault. It isn't. It isn't. It's not just that. It's like a lot of things.
That
like
was
Brexit
brewing
could have
underneath.
been much more
The government
successful
stepped
if
in and
treated
borrowed
well.
an additional £280 billion in its response to the coronavirus. This was deemed necessary to get the nation through the pandemic. But here's the thing, most of the COVID bailout was borrowed when interest rates were at historic lows, sitting around 0.1%. At the time, repayments were expected to be relatively manageable, and this might have been true were it not for the final nail in the coffin, the Ukraine war.
Yeah.
The minute the Russians began their full-scale assault, access to Russian oil and gas was halted by sanctions and trade restrictions. At the same time, an energy crisis.
What did I say? This is the same that happened in Germany.
Started brewing, and the cost of living jumped across Europe. The crisis hit close to home. British households were projected to pay 3 times the previous price just to heat their homes during the winter. Much of the public was anxious, so the British government intervened again. This time, it was one of Europe's most generous in financial support. Between 60 billion and 100 billion pounds in additional spending went straight into Britain's debt. The damage to households was mild, but the bailout gave the UK its biggest increase in debt as a share of its GDP. The synthesized pandemic crisis and energy crisis pushed inflation rates to new highs. In response, central banks ramped up the interest rate. For ordinary citizens, this meant that mortgage payments went up overnight by hundreds of pounds. Meanwhile, for the government, the high interest rate added additional billions to the national debt. While before, debt repayments were believed to be relatively manageable, after the energy crisis, debt became increasingly expensive to pay off. Servicing debt jumped from £40 billion per year to about £100 billion per year. That is a staggering £60 billion increase in spending, which is nearly the entire British defense budget. So, yeah, although admirably, Britain's support to Ukraine essentially broke its economy.
Yeah.
Britain's debt interest bill is now the country's second largest item of.
And I don't mind if you say I'm happy with that, right? Meaning maybe this is what the government wanted to do. But to be honest, I think that the Russian invasion of Ukraine was treated poorly from us, I mean Europeans, prior of that happening, and even after that happened. Meaning we haven't basically thought about the long-term repercussions of that. You should have probably listened to the United States, even though I don't like them too much, but saying to go away from Russia as much as you can before something like this happened, because then putting in place all those sanctions just have had a negative effect on us, not on them.
Of spending. The surge in debt has reduced available funds by tens of billions of pounds, limiting spending on other items. Nearly all the country's public services are affected by it, which then depreciates the quality public services can provide.
To be honest, in Germany, this is the same, literally. Look.
At its core, economics.
Most likely, they will talk about what I was talking before. 100%. And as I said, the biggest problem in the Western world is probably the one that they are about to say.
Is about more than markets and money alone. It is about understanding the choices people make and how demographics drive those decisions.
Yeah.
Economics is essentially the study of people, not just numbers.
Yes.
After the COVID lockdowns subsided and life returned to normal, every advanced economy
didn't watch it,
witnessed a surge in the workforce. People found jobs and moved on with their lives. This chart shows the change in economic activity among the G7 nations between 2019 and 2023. Britain stands out. Its workforce never recovered. It just stayed low. A smaller workforce has all sorts of ripple effects. It means less taxes to pay for services like healthcare and greater expenditures on social benefits. It also means people have less money to spend, which hurts businesses and affects the number of jobs available in an economy. So the consequences go full circle. But Britain's workforce problem goes much deeper than the missing 1%. Officially, unemployment in Britain is low by historical standards, sitting at 4.4%, which amounts to 1.5 million people. But reality paints a different picture. Britain's workforce is missing a staggering 11 million people. The government doesn't consider it unemployment though, calling it economically inactive instead. The reasoning is that this group, amounting to 9.4 million people, is technically not looking for work or is available to start a job. The Office for National Statistics explains the motives. About 2.1 million, aged between 16 and 24, are students and thus economically inactive. About 3.5 million of those over 50 years old are out of the workforce due to sickness and early retirement. Meanwhile, at least 1 million people aged between 25 and 49 years do not work because of caring responsibilities. A workforce missing 11 million people is no small matter, but businesses need to keep running regardless. This puts tremendous pressure on the government, and one way to offset the difference is by opening the borders.
All right, this is kind of what I said and kind of not, meaning that he didn't address the fact that they have low fertility rates, therefore less young people and so on. They said that there was like a lack of workers because the people who are in the country just simply doesn't go to work.
So, British lawmakers did just that. More people from outside the UK immigrated to the country to work, with South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa standing out. These migrant workers fill the gaps left by a reduced workforce. But simultaneously, the rapid and large-scale influx of immigrants has raised social tensions within the nation. People feel threatened by the changing ethnic demographics, and some lawmakers exploit such moods to score political goals. In early August 2024, anti-immigration protests and riots rocked Britain, affecting over 20 towns. While the riots have peaked, addressing the origins will take much longer to fix. In its entirety, Britain's economic chronicle, marked by a continuous decline, illustrates how one crisis triggers another and yet another, and ultimately leads to a chain of events from which there is no immediate relief. This is the bed that was made, and now people must sleep in it. On the plus side, every nation goes through ups and downs, and the UK is no exception. London is still one of the wealthiest and most innovative cities on the planet. Eventually, things will get better, but until then, Britain will function like a third world economy attached to London.
To be honest, I think there is no bouncing back for a lot of issues here. And the same will go for Germany, the same will go for France, and so on. When you have, as I was mentioning at the beginning, when you have a young workforce, then you have innovation, you have this and that. When you don't have also social tensions due to that workforce, then you have, and even what I mean by that, you put migrants in, migrants work into certain jobs, they get hate from the group create tensions between the two groups, like the natives and the imported ones, and we're not going anywhere. So if there is not a monolithic society that actually works together in moving forward, you will have in a long-term effect actually a negative output from immigration as well. So there is no go back from this type of problems that they are creating. It's just simply because people think that I will fill the nation with as many 12-year-old or 15-year-old that I can find from a third world country, thinking that those people will then have you in their minds. If you're even the past colonizer, even worse, they don't want to have anything to do with you, and they're just using you because historically you have used them. And the same way for the natives, imagine flooded with new people that quote unquote take your job. It just creates an endless loop of social tension. That mixed with the fact that you have an older workforce mixed with the fact that you have taken not the smartest political decisions in the last years, that mixed with things that you could have not predicted, like COVID-19, and it creates reverse industrialism. The industrialization is something that will happen, I think, all across Europe. Anyway, I enjoyed the video. This is what I expected at the end of the day. Not too much in details, but I liked it.